Well, greetings all.
Good morning.
This is our last Zoom room for this class, and a lot of work I know that you've all been involved in, and you'll keep doing that, I know, as you get to the finish line for this course, and then as you continue to work on your dissertation. So let me pray for you and all of us, and that the Lord will watch over our time together and watch over our various situations. Father, we thank you again that we can come to you and address you as our God and our Father. We thank you, Lord, that you do continually care for us. Your Apostle Peter said that we could cast all of our cares on you because you care about us. We just thank you for that promise, and we do that, Father. I thank you just for all my colleagues here in the classroom, Lord, just the work that each one is doing. I just pray that you will continue to give each one direction and wisdom and excellence of work. We want to honor you in our work, Father. You said that we should do all things with excellence. And so give us the ability to do that, Father. Thank you, and we just put all these matters in your care. And it's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. All right. We want to get to a couple of things today. Dr. Henry is going to give a presentation on focus groups. She's done just a lot of research in that area, and we'll be looking forward to that. I'm going to just give a few comments on our institutional review board, and I'll just kind of show you the applications and the material that you'll need to use just to have your proposal reviewed by the IRB, just to make sure that you're on track with all the requirements that are required for research with humans, as the Department of Health and Human Services here in the United States puts it. Any quick questions before we jump into some of those presentations on what you've been doing, or concerns? Let's just take a minute and make sure that we've got any issues taken care of.
Dr. Payne.
Go ahead, Matt.
My concern is still that I'm not receiving emails from the group, and as we kind of disband our meeting time, I'll probably be left out if I don't get that fixed.
Mm-hmm. Did you send an email over to Natalia just to see if she can give you any help on that?
Yeah, I did. I haven't heard from her.
Okay. I'll send her an email also, just to kind of remind her to look into that issue, because I don't know the answer either, since you did put your correct email in there, and I looked at it and everything looked good to me. So Natalia will have to look at it from her perspective.
When I looked at it one time, when I didn't receive it the first time I looked at it, it had a strike through in it.
Yeah, the first time I saw it, but after whatever you did, it seemed like it removed that strike through. So let me just make myself a note here, and I'll just check into that after this session. Okay, anything else that anyone needs to mention? All right, well, for the sake of time, why don't you start finding that PowerPoint, Dr. Henry, and we will move ahead.
Yes, I will share my screen in a minute. Have any of you been involved, well, been a participant of a focus group? Any of you been a participant of a focus group? Nobody? Okay. Now, as a participant, there's a lot that you will not be aware of that goes on behind the scenes to be able to have a focus group. And this presentation and the one that I shared with you last week that I put in the course will certainly get you to see all that is involved in a focus group. Now, with respect to how researchers report their work, many times the research reports that you would have read, in terms of the method section, the researcher may say, well, I used a focus group, or I collected data via a focus group. However, they do not give you the full information about what is involved in doing a focus group. And I think as a result of that, some people just seeing the word focus group, especially the word group, assumes that this is a simple process. It's not. It's very intentional. It takes careful planning and execution, as you will see from the presentation that I'm about to share with you. We just had the defense of a student whom I guided in his research, and he did a focus group. He ended up having several focus groups. I think he had from about 6 to 8 focus groups. Now, and that's one of the first things I want to share with you, and you'll see it in the presentation. In order to have a meaningful data collection process using the focus group, you have to have at least 3 focus groups. You have to have at least 3. That's very important. We'll see it coming up in the process. And then each focus group should have a minimum of 8 to a maximum of 12 individuals. And that is important because the focus group is a discussion, and the moderator of the focus group has to be able to manage it, and the recorder has to be able to record every word of every speaker in the focus group. So just to give you a sense of what are the tasks that you'll have to do. Moving along, in July, I'll be teaching a 1-credit course on the focus group and interview. So for those of you who are intending to collect your data using the focus group, I would advise that you take that 1-credit course. It will go for 5 weeks, so it's intense, but it will take you step by step through the process of what it means to have a focus group. And of course, the piece that is central and important is how do you analyze data from a focus group. There is a process by which you not just record, but you have to analyze the data. So that is just a brief introduction to the concept of collecting data using the focus group. And I will share this video. I'm sorry, this PowerPoint, which I like very much because it covers all the ground that you need to be aware of. It comes out of Purdue Extension, their community development section. The first section looks at what is a focus group. The second section, how to set up and facilitate your focus group. The third section, how to analyze the data and present the findings. And the fourth section, they call it your turn. You go out and do it. This is a graphic of what a focus group looks like. It's a conversational encounter. So you want participants facing each other, seeing each other. Now, in this time of COVID, that is going to be a challenge. You probably have to think of scheduling, collecting your data through the focus group later when we have the freedom to be together with each other, something for you to think about. But just alerting you, it is a close group discussion. A focus group is a carefully planned discussion that's designed to obtain perceptions and opinions on a defined topic of interest in a non-threatening manner. Please excuse me a minute. A focus group should be a discussion that is comfortable and enjoyable for the participants as they share their thoughts and ideas. A focus group is different from a key informant interview, which is one-on-one discussion, though both can be rich sources of qualitative data when collecting community level input. And I just want to pause and say a little bit more about that. There is what we call the focus group, and there is what we call the key informant interview. And they are different. Yes, they are both interviews, but the focus group is a group interview, whereas the key informant is a one-on-one interview, and you have other kinds of interviews that you can do to collect data. But there's a difference in terms of the intensity and the process that you go through between doing a focus group and doing a key informant interview. One of the things you may do with a key informant interview is you may have a first round interview where you have asked a set of questions. And as a result of the accumulation of data, you may decide to have that person meet with you a second time to do a more in-depth interview as a result of the responses you got in the first round of the interview. With a focus group, one encounter is the one that you have. There's not a follow-up. What you may do as a result of the focus group, and you have to think that over very carefully, of course, and then you have to have people's permission, is as a result of the focus group, you may want to single out individuals whom you want to interview separately. But I am a little wary about that approach because then you would, in your initial invitation to the people to participate in the focus group, you would have to say that you may require a follow-up interview. And it may be that individuals may feel comfortable meeting with you in a group setting and answering your questions, but they may not necessarily want to meet with you one-on-one. And just to throw in there that one of the things you avoid doing when you have a focus group is you avoid addressing sensitive personal issues that may be embarrassing to people. So just, and that I'm sure is going to come up somewhere later. So there are 6 key features of the focus group. People who provide you with data. It's conducted with a series of groups. Remember, I mentioned that the recommendation is that you should have at least 3 focus groups. And the data is qualitative in nature. And the focus group possess certain characteristics. The discussion is focused. It's not just a discussion on anything. there is a clear subject matter that you're going to address in the focus group. It involves people, typically 8 to 10 people, but it can range from as few as 4 to as many as 12. It's recommended that you have at least 8 individuals. The group size is conditional on 2 factors. It must be large enough to provide diversity of perceptions, and it must be small enough for everyone to have an opportunity to share insights. It's conducted with a series of groups. It is recommended that you use multiple groups in order to detect patterns and trends across groups, at least 3. A single focus group interview is risky because moderators will occasionally encounter what we call cold groups. That is, participants who are quiet or reluctant to actively participate. Now, if you have a focus group like that, you're in trouble because you're not getting information. So, and that is one of the reasons why it is recommended that you do multiple groups, at least 3 groups. The focus group possesses certain characteristics. It's often composed of people who are similar to each other. The nature of this homogeneity is determined by the purpose of the study and is the basis for the recruitment. The issue is essentially, who do you want to hear from? And in the context in which this point was presented, they give the example of the extension educator and his or her planning team should decide who the target audience is and invite people who reflect these characteristics. So similarly, you have to look at your own study and be able to identify who are the people who are most likely to be able to give you the data, the information that you need to address the issue that you're covering. So you are selective in terms of who you invite to participate in your focus group. Focus groups have traditionally involved people who do not know each other, but at times this is difficult. So you try to avoid involving people who know each other well. So in your selection process, you want to be aware of whom you're inviting and if there is some relationship between members of the group. What's a focus group? Focus groups pay attention to the perceptions of people regarding community matters. So the underlying questions that you are asking of individuals is to get to their perceptions, what they think, what they feel. Focus groups versus the key informant interview. In the focus group, participants generate their own responses, but also respond to other comments. So there is a back and forth between the moderator and the participants talk to each other too. So you have to be able to capture all that conversation and the cross conversation. Key informant interviews zero in on more specific personal information and motivations, and that participants might not feel comfortable discussing in a large group. And they offer a depth of content by an expert, a victim, etc. Let me stop here for anybody to ask a question or make a clarification or an observation. Remember to unmute yourself before you speak.
I have a question.
Okay, Abu.
Yeah. You said in the previous slide that try to avoid a person know each other. Do I get you correct?
Sorry, I'm not hearing you clearly.
You said that avoid participants that know each other very well.
Yes.
Why is that? Because this is a small group?
Because it's a small group.
Uh-huh.
And if people know each other very well,
Uh-huh.
and it may be that in the discussion, it may go either way. It may be that people shut up,
Mm-hmm.
or it may be that people get into arguments. The fact that people may know each other may interfere with the process of the focus group.
So my question is here, if I conduct focus group and the issue is something similar expertise and so on, so how could I select my focus group?
Okay, the class that I will be teaching in July will give you the details of that.
Okay.
So, this is not a place to answer that detail. However, what we are saying to you is that you have to be careful in selecting the participants whom you would invite to the focus group. You're inviting people to participate, which also means that you want to invite, perhaps if you're aiming to get 8 people, you probably want to invite 12 people, because you have to make room for people responding negatively. So those are some of the details that you have to consider as you put together your focus group. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Dr. Henry, you mentioned a minimum of three focus groups, 8 to 10 people. Is it customary to include to use both one-on-one and focus groups?
Okay. In your data collection, there are different modes to collect data. It may be that you use both the focus group and the personal interview, but those are separate, right? So it is possible, but let me ask you why you asked that question, because I want to make a comment, but I'll be fair to you first. Why did you ask that question?
Well, the idea is, can the one-on-one substitute for a focus group if you have 2 focus?
That's what I thought where I thought you were going. No, it's 2 different methods of data collection. And when you report the data, you're going to report them differently. You're going to assemble the data that you collected from the focus group, and you're going to report that, and then you're going to assemble the data that you collected from the interviews. And one of the reasons why you're collecting data from in 2 different methods here is that you're going to try to triangulate the data to see, are there similarities or are there differences across the 2 methods? Is it that the focus group gives you more information than the interviews, or are they the same? So when you're going to triangulate, you're going to keep those 2 groups separately. So you can't, for example, as I said, you need to have a minimum of 3 focus groups. So you can't decide to do the personal interviews to substitute. For example, you may decide you just want to do 2 focus groups and have the personal interviews to substitute for the focus group. No, you can't do that.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. So is it always considered a good thing to use one-on-one interviews in conjunction with focus groups, or is it?
No, it's up to you in terms of what you're studying and how you want to collect your data. It may be that you decide to do focus groups and you decide to do questionnaires where people answer a survey anonymously and you collect that data. It may be that you decide to do focus group and one-on-one interviews. It's up to you. What is important in doing research is that you be transparent. So you state what you did and why you did it. So if you're going to have both focus groups and interviews, you're going to explain to the reader the reason why you've had both focus group and interviews. One of the reasons we do that in terms of data collection in research is to triangulate your data.
Go ahead, Matt, and then I'll ask my question.
Is it possible to use one-on-one interviews of one of the persons in one of the focus groups?
I just said that I do not advise that, because the one-on-one interview has a particular purpose to it. And if you're going to invite somebody to participate in the focus group, then my question is, why are you also having a one-on-one interview with them? You'll have to explain that, because you cannot assume that a person who is prepared to come and give you information in the context of a focus group would be willing to do the same thing one-on-one.
Okay.
You want to avoid making that assumption. And like I said, if you're going to do that, then you need to, ahead of time, let the person know that you want to have them in the focus group and do a one-on-one interview. And I'm not sure if I would advise that.
Thank you.
Is that clear?
Let me make a comment, and it's an issue that I know we dealt with. I think last week, you and I, Dr. Henry, were with Noel Holder. I've wrestled again with this issue too, with triangulation, and I mentioned it in that oral review last week. If the purpose is triangulation, okay, the triangulation, and I'm going to just give my perspective now. Triangulation is, I would look at triangulation, as I've read about triangulation, is to gather data from different people, from different sources on the same issue. Mm-hmm. Like we could gather data from a focus group, you could gather data from one-on-one interviews, you could gather data from surveys, you could gather data from documentation, say if you're working with an organization. Okay, in that case, each of the sources would be different. For example, you'd have different people that you would use in your focus group from people that you maybe would do one-on-ones with, okay? And maybe another set of people you may do a written survey. In that case, you're using, say, 3 different sources with different sets of people to see how the data correlates with each other, how it compares, based on that kind of an approach. Another approach, and I'm not quite sure how to catalog this yet, maybe we can talk about it. I think last week we talked about using the term validity. There's been situations I know in the dissertations where someone maybe does a survey, and then based on the results of that survey, that person will then contact people who he or she thinks would be appropriately an appropriate fit for a focus group. But the survey was kind of an introductory tool, a selection tool, if you will, to determine who might be appropriate candidates to fit into a focus group. Now that I'm understanding that term triangulation even a little more, that would not necessarily be a process of triangulation. You're using, in that case, the survey as a selection methodology to select people for a focus group. I'm thinking you could possibly do the same thing if you maybe did some initial interviews because you're trying to determine a group of people that you'd like to have participate in a focus group. You might do some one-on-ones just as an introductory approach. Based on those interviews, you may then choose people who would go into a focus group. But you're not using, in that case, you're not using the interviews or those surveys as triangulation. You are using them as part of your selection criteria. So anyway, that's my perception right now. Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
Dr. Payne, the second illustration I would agree with in terms of first having the personal interview as a means to help you to decide who you will put in the focus group.
Mhm.
Now, like you rightly said, that personal interview will not be seen as data collection. It's the focus group that is going to be the means of data collection. And of course, you have to have the individual's permission to be in both, to be in the personal interview and then be in the focus group. However, in terms of this survey, and our survey there, I'm seeing you sending out a questionnaire. One of the characteristics of the survey is anonymity and confidentiality. So if as a result of sending out the survey, you're going to be making selection of individuals, the question will arise, how did you know who I was? So I don't see us using that process. The survey data is a different method of collecting data from the interview from the focus group.
I think the key word there, as you've said, is what you are using for data collection, in terms of, whereas, in the case of say a survey, if we're doing a quantitative survey, anonymity is, an important criteria. So therefore, and it's that's going to be a data collection method that I'm going to use that data as part of my findings. So yeah, I think that's the issue. And like you said earlier, a key is you're always needing to say why are you using this particular methodology in this particular research process? Why are you using the interview? Are you using the interview as part of your selection process, or you're using your interview to gather data that is going to, be a part of your research findings? So defining your purpose for each data gathering methodology is important. And we say that in the template.
Yes, okay. Okay, let's move on. Discussion is focused. That's why we call it a focus group. The topics of discussion in a focus group are carefully, note the word, predetermined and sequenced. So it's not a regular conversation. It's not a conversational group at all. The organizer of the focus group has a set of predetermined questions, and they are sequenced intentionally. They are presented in a manner that is understandable to participants, of course, and they are open-ended questions. You don't use closed-ended questions in a focus group. These questions, called the questioning route, are arranged in a natural, logical sequence. We will address that some more in the course. How to set up and facilitate your focus group. The key to a well-organized focus group is a process agenda. This is a type of agenda that offers a minute-by-minute approach to managing the anticipated discussion. You're literally timing the questions. You expect people to answer question 1 in 2 minutes. You literally put that in your list of questions. So nothing is left to chance. It is carefully managed. You start with the end result in mind. Choose your questions based on the responses they are likely to generate, and categorize these responses into themes to report on. Embed both a quantitative piece and an interactive piece into your 90 minutes. It's recommended that the focus group should be approximately 90 minutes. In the literature, there are focus groups that go for 2 hours. But remember, people's time is important. And it seems as though the 90 minutes is a good enough time in which to collect data using the focus group methodology. Types of questions, there's what is called the opening question, the introductory, the transition. Notice the key questions come towards the end, and then the end.
No.
Yes. The opening questions, this is the round robin question that everyone answers at the beginning of the focus group. It is designed to be answered rather quickly and to identify characteristics that the participants have in common. It's like what we may call an icebreaker. Get people comfortable with each other. It is preferable for these questions to be factual as opposed to attitude or opinion-based questions. The introductory questions, these are the questions that introduce the general topic of discussion and provide participants an opportunity to reflect on past experiences and their connection with the overall topic. These questions are usually not critical to the analysis and are intended to foster conversation and interaction among the participants. The transition questions, these questions move the conversation into the key questions that drive the study. These questions serve as the logical link between the introductory questions and the key questions. During these transition questions, the participants are becoming aware of how others view the topic. Key questions. These are the questions that drive the study. Typically, there are 2 to 5 questions in this category. These are usually the first questions that you tend to develop and the ones you usually require the greatest attention in the subsequent analysis. So your key questions will come out of your major questions of the study, the key questions that you would ask in the focus group. So in the actual focus group, you don't necessarily word your questions in the same way as you word it as major questions of the study. You're going to have to break it down so that people could respond to it conversationally and with a sense of they don't have to feel pressure. They don't have to feel that they're answering an academic question. They're telling you their perceptions, their feelings, their knowledge. So you could see then that you're going to have to rewrite or break down your key questions of the study to make them focus group questions. That's my point. The ending questions. These questions bring closer to the discussion, enabling participants to reflect back on previous comments that are critical to the analysis. These questions can help prioritize previous comments and suggest strategies or key takeaways for final report of the focus group findings. Questions, comments as we move on? And here we just see an example of how you literally plan minute by minute for the process of the focus group.
Dr. Clary,
So,
I have a question here.
Yes.
In the key questions, that 2 to 5 questions, is that possible to send to the participants before they came to make them ready? No.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, the focus group is it's spontaneous. What you do tell them is the overall topic that they are going to be studying. You're not giving them homework. You are not giving them homework. I mean, you are doing homework, but they're not doing academic homework for you. So no, you're not doing that. Okay, just think about it. If somebody invited you to a group that is supposed to be an informal discussion and sent you some questions to prepare ahead, I would be loath to do that.
Okay.
You understand? Just put yourself in the place of the participants. These are, as we said, this is just an example of the process, how you plan the process out carefully. It will be up on the board for you to look at. So how to analyze the data and present the findings. In the data collection, it is recommended that you have a digital recorder and you also take notes. You do both, right? Because if in your note taking you have left out something, you can put on the tape recorder to go through it. And let me tell you, if you've ever had to do transcription from a tape recorder or recorder, that's a lot of work. And that's no easy work, believe you me. But that's the process. Electronic recordings will be transcribed. So you have to explain the anonymity policy to the participants and warn them against having what we call side conversations that would be caught on tape. You know, in a group, you may be having one discussion and then people start to have their side discussions. You want to warn the participants about that because everything is going to be on tape. The recorder might miss the side conversation, but the tape will pick it up and give you a headache to transcribe it. So just letting you know. Step 2, you upload the transcriptions into analysis software. Now there are software that can do your analysis for you. However, as we'll look at in the course, it is good for you to do the analysis by yourself first. And what you do is you literally have the transcription and you go through and color code responses to identify various themes in coming out of the focus group discussion. And that's the same thing that will be done in by the software. Of course, they'll do that in 2 minutes when you probably take 2 days to do it. But it is a good practice to be able to do the hand transcription and the coding to get you to have a sense and a feel for how the data is emerging. Step 3, create notes from the questions. Using the questions from your process agenda, you create what we call notes or themes by which the text will be classified. If necessary, you rely on your field notes at the briefing session with a team to develop the note structure. Let me explain this about the focus group. One of the things you're going to notice about the focus group is that the managing of it is a team effort. You are the single researcher doing your research, but in most research processes, when you have a focus group, you have, if you're going to do collect your data using focus group, you're going to have assistance. For example, in the actual focus group, as the researcher, you may take the role of moderator. However, you're going to have someone who transcribes while you're moderating. You're going to also have someone who is taping while the discussion is going on. So that's where we get the reference to a team. Because yes, you're the key researcher and you're moderating, but you're relying on these other people. So what you do is you meet together to have a debriefing session immediately after the focus group so that you could see if you heard the same thing. I mean, even before you transcribe the data, you could talk about, you know, the atmosphere in the room, you know, etc., etc. Okay. Step 4, as you prepare to analyze your data, we talk about using the node structure, and the node there refers to themes that you have developed. You scroll through the transcription and assign text under the different themes by highlighting, copying, and pasting. This process can also be automated, but won't be as accurate as when you do it by hand. Factors to consider in the analysis. Find the big ideas. And you do this in the process of creating the themes. Give careful thought to the trends or ideas that cut across the entire discussion. Consider the frequency or extensiveness of comments. Some topics are discussed by more participants. That speaks to extensiveness. And some comments are made more often. That speaks to frequency than others. You consider the intensity of comments. Participants may talk about a topic with a special intensity or depth of feeling. Consider the specific, that's a tongue twister, of responses. Responses that are specific and based on experiences should be given more weight than those that are vague and impersonal. So there's an analysis by NVivo, which is a software analysis. You upload your transcription, you create your themes, you assign text from the answers, and then key themes will emerge, the output. The written report. And the written report is going to be your chapter 4, yes, method, analysis of the data, your chapter 4. The cover page, etc. The brief, well-written executive summaries. Because you're doing a dissertation, it's not quite that way. But where you're just doing focus group, this is the way you will put together your report. For you, your chapter 4 will be where you report your analysis of the data from the focus group, okay? Now, what you want to do in your chapter 4, chapter 3 is methodology, and there you will describe the method that you will use. And if you're going to use the focus group, you will state in chapter 3 how many focus groups you're going to have, how many persons per focus group, how you will invite people to participate in the focus group. And at the beginning of the focus group, there's a script that you will read to the group in terms of identifying the topic of issue that they will be discussing. You do that at the beginning of and of course you thank them for their participation. Another thing you will do in the focus group, let me see if this is mentioned here. Okay, this is not mentioned here, but it's recommended, because this is a focus group, it's a group discussion, you want to make people as comfortable as possible. So one of the basic things you do when you have a focus group is you have some refreshments. It's 90 minutes. And in some cases, you have a reward, and I want to use this word carefully. At the end of the focus group, you give people something for their participation. The student whom we just had do his defense, he did something very interesting. He's from Guyana, and of course, people had to travel to the place where they meet for the focus group. And for most people, that travel costs because they're not, well, it costs if you're driving your own car, but they're using public transportation, etc. So what he did at the end of his focus group, and he said the people were pleasantly surprised, he gave them what it would have cost them to travel to the focus group site. I think it was a one-way fare. That is pretty impressive. And he had a lot of focus groups. So that's something for you to think about in terms of the context in which you will be doing your focus group. Just letting you know the details that you need to be planning for as you plan for the focus group. Okay, that brings us to the end. Questions, comments? Does that mean that we're all confused?
No, I had a question, Dr. Henry, about, I put it in the chat, but as
Yes.
we consider different people, um, and we think about, should they be a key informant or should we include them in one of our focus groups? What are some considerations you think that we should make?
A key informant is different to a person whom you put in a focus group. The phrase there is key. So the key informant is somebody whom you expect to give you important information regarding your study. So you would not be putting a key informant in a focus group. You will be doing an interview with a key informant, a one-on-one interview.
So I was thinking, just correct my thinking on this, as I began to think about who I would have in my focus group, because of the number of people I need to talk to. Some of them, I mean, in my context, I'll be talking to Christian leaders, pastors, things like I mean, there may be some of them who stand out, but a lot of them, any of them probably could be, one-on-one interviews. But in the focus group, I will be trying to multiply some of my efforts and talk with them simultaneously.
I'm not sure I'm clear in terms of what you mean by talking with them simultaneously. The focus group is a conversational piece, and the conversation is not around you. The conversation is among the people as they respond to the questions that you're asking. So that's an important piece, and I know it will come out in the class that I'll be offering in July. As moderator, you do not enter into the discussion.
Right. No, maybe I worded it wrong. I don't really mean enter into the discussion. I'm just saying, like, get information from them, ask them the questions. I can hear from 10 pastors in a focus group versus meeting with all of them one-on-one. Any one of them, though, their information is valuable in the sense of being able to inform what I'm trying to research.
Let me make one comment there, Patricia.
Thank you, Dr. Payne.
There again, it gets down to the purpose. You would have possibly a different purpose for different focus groups. Say, you're working in Cleveland and you're seeking to, I think, right, you want to motivate Christian groups to become involved in community development, right? Do
Yes.
I have your topic correct? Okay.
You got it.
So you possibly would want to gather a group of, say, 8 to 10 pastors, and you're going to discuss that issue with them, with some predetermined questions. Okay, your purpose there is to gain perception from some of the Christian leadership within that community. You may have another focus group that is made up of non-clergy, or whatever term you want to use, and again, you have a different purpose. You're looking for what is the perception of those that are not necessarily functioning in leadership, but they are members of churches or whatever. So again, it gets down to, what's your purpose for each group, okay? So, you'd possibly have a different purpose for each of those groups, one with the professional leaders, another with, say, members of different churches. That'd be one way to look at it from my perspective.
Right. And so looking at it that way, what are key traits maybe I would look for in a key informant? Maybe they're a pastor or something who's been around longer, or who has more of what someone would call greater experience or expertise. Like, what would I consider in either putting that pastor in one of the focus groups versus having a one-on-one interview with him or her?
Okay, there again, your purpose, and I think as Dr. Henry said, if you are going to gain information, let's just use the term key informant, because there are certain people that seem to have a higher level of expertise in a particular issue, okay? By putting those people in a focus group, I think you could greatly sway a focus group. That person could really take over a focus group just because they're in their expertise. That wouldn't really be appropriate for the purpose of the main general purpose for a focus group.
Mm-hmm.
So you would say, as you met with a key informant, someone who has a high degree of expertise, say in community development, in your particular topic, you are gathering information from that person. You're going to analyze that interview just like you do other analysis. You'd probably use some kind of thematic analysis, right? What themes came forth as you talked with that key informant? You may then have a focus group of, say, 8 or 10 pastors. You're looking for the key themes that come forth from that group. Again, you may have another focus group with some non-leaders, and you're looking for the themes that come forth in that group. Now, how do those various themes, what people think are important, how do they compare as you look at the data gathered from those three sources? A key informant, a group of pastors, and a group of lay people. There again, that's three different sources, and your purpose then is to see, do similar themes come forth from those three different sources, or are they very different? And what you're doing, and you're trying to understand the perception of various people in relationship to community development, Christian community development, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Just one thing I'd like to say, Dr. Payne, to what you have said. Patricia, that example that Dr. Payne gave doesn't mean that you're going to have two focus group and one key informant interview. An informant interview, a key informant, you need to have more than one. And the focus group, you need to have a minimum of 3. Okay, just making that clear.
Yes, I definitely got that. Thank you.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. But when I look at surveys and interviews as well as focus groups, I think of a list of questions. Are most of those questions, or all of those questions, based on the primary question and supporting questions that we looked at in chapters 1 and 2?
Yes. Yes, the questions, they're not random. These are questions that are coming out of your questions of the study. So you're breaking down your major questions into bite size so that people could respond comfortably in the context of a focus group. You may, in terms of a survey, you may find an instrument that has already been created that you may use for the purpose of your study, and you have that instrument, people respond to that instrument anonymously and with confidence. So that's your survey. And then you may identify individuals whom you may call key informants and have one-on-one interviews with those people, because you expect to get information that is vital to your study. But for each method, you're going to report that and report why you chose to use that method. That is what is important.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears just because of our time issue. I'm not going to take time to go through this whole document. What I would like you to do is make sure you pay attention to pages 107 and following in Miriam's book, because they do a good job, I think. They, in this particular situation, they're laying out the structures, say, for an interview. They use highly structured or semi-structured, and you might read through that. Toward the end, though, they get into types of questions, and I'm thinking you could probably use this same kind of a guide whether you were developing questions for a focus group or a one-on-one. Looking, at questions that are related to experience and behavior. tell me what your typical day looks like. Okay, that's a feeling behavioral question. Opinion value questions. What is your opinion about school administrators being teachers? Okay, opinion value questions. You could keep going through these feeling questions, knowledge questions, background questions. Each type of question, though, has a specific purpose. And as we just said, no matter if you're doing a focus group or if you're using one-on-ones, each question and everything you do within those gathering approaches needs to relate back to your primary and supporting research question, because that's the whole point. Those questions are actually the guiding principles for the whole dissertation, right? So your purpose is always to be answering those research questions using various sources of data that you're using to research these particular questions. So yeah, you're looking at questions, whether you're finding standardized assessment tools that you maybe use in a quantitative study. They all need to relate back to help you answer those research questions. Okay, when I'm in an oral review now, one of the final questions I'll usually ask is, okay, give me a summary of how your research answered each of the research questions that you have listed in chapter 1 of your dissertation. If you can't do that, then you've not really implemented a successful dissertation. I've had students, and before they get to the oral review, they design all kinds of research methods and questions, the things they wanted to know. But then I asked them, well, now how do these questions relate back to the questions you told me in chapter 1? And they said, oh, well, I wanted to know some of these other things. Well, that's fine, but for a dissertation, the research questions are the focus, period. Okay, any other thoughts, questions on that one before I switch screens here? Okay, again, do take a look at this on Miriam's book, though, page 107 and following. I want to spend a few minutes here toward the end of our session just to talk about the Institutional Review Board, which we have at BGU. Let me just bring this one up for a moment. We have an Institutional Review Board, IRB. You'll see that abbreviation. This is the policy manual that we've utilized for our review board. We put this review board back together back in 2017-18 when we actually didn't have a review board before that time, and so we went ahead and implemented that in response to the Department of Health and Human Services. But let's just look at this manual. I'm just going to highlight a few things and then I'll show you a few forms that you would be filling out as you become related to this particular committee in our school. Faculty Graduate University encourages the conduct of ethical practices in relationship to all research related to human subjects. And that's the key for this material that comes out of the Department of Health and Human Services. BGU has adopted guidelines outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 45, Public Welfare, Part 46, Protection of Human Subjects. And this document is available at such and such. Okay. And you can just look up protection of human subjects on internet, and you'll probably get to this website. It's a U.S. government website that will give you a lot of these guidelines. What we've done, and most schools do, they take these guidelines and they distill them into some kind of a form that can be used by a committee to oversee and make sure that those guidelines are being followed within any institution. Before collecting any research data related to human subjects, all students, faculty, project supervisors, and other staff members must obtain approval from the BGU Institutional Review Board when required by criteria established in the federal regulations defined in, excuse me, section 45, parts 46. And that's then what this whole policy manual is all about. It's defining what these regulations are that we must follow. Back in 1974, there was a document that was actually created and circulating in the US government called the Belmont Report. 1979, I guess, is when that one actually, the first edition of the Belmont Report came out. And it's the whole purpose of the Belmont Report, again, was to establish ethical bases for regulations, okay? There were three main guidelines for the Belmont Report, and these are what all these regulations are based upon. Number one, respect of persons. Two parts of this. Number one, first, that individuals should be treated as autonomous agents, okay? That they think for themselves, they are not being coerced into answers or a certain way you want them to answer or think. Second, that persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection, thus the need to obtain what we call informed consent, okay? So those are two issues in terms of a respect for people. A concept that's called beneficence. This means treating people in an ethical manner, not only by respecting their decisions, but also by making every effort to secure their well-being, okay? Two general rules: do no harm, you know, one of the medical profession requirements. Number two, protect from harm by maximizing anticipated results and minimizing possible risks. When we on the Institutional Review Board review a proposal and a form that a person will fill out, that's one of our primary criteria, is what level of risk is involved to the participants in this project. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little more specifics in just a minute. A third concept in this Belmont Report is called justice. Justice requires that benefits and burdens of research be distributed fairly. Thus, the principle of justice is applied in the selection of research subjects, for example. Okay, that we do all things fairly. We do not. Try not to show bias. We do everything fairly and with justice. So we respect people. Okay, that they are individuals. We don't try to coerce them, etc. We treat them in a way that would not harm them, either physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. And then we do all things in a just, fair manner. Okay, so those are the big principles that are involved in the whole IRB, Institutional Review Board. As we get a little more detailed, one of the issues that is very key, we've already talked about this, you know, benefits and risk, and this whole handbook is you know, kind of just elaborates on those three big principles that we just talked about. You know, minimum risk. Another concept that we use on the IRB board. Okay, there may be a level of risk. For example, we'll see in a moment that if you have youth involved in as participants in your project, you know, anyone 18 or under 18, there's always a risk, right, as you bring youth into a situation. What we will evaluate, do the benefits of this research outweigh any risk that may be involved? Okay, so again, another one of those key criteria that we use when we are examining a proposal. We also talk about vulnerable populations, and these two areas right here are very major for us. Okay, if your research is going to involve any vulnerable populations, then you must have your proposal reviewed by the IRB and you must issue a consent form. Now, those are the bottom line requirements. I think, as I've said, and I think Dr. Henry has said, it's a good idea to have any proposal at least reviewed briefly. I'm the chairman of that particular institution review board. You will send application material to me to start with. I would then generally make a determination. Yes, I think this needs to go to the full committee rather than just myself as the coordinator of that committee. But so all proposals, I probably think it's a good idea that any of those proposals, you at least fill out an application. But any vulnerable populations that are involved must have the consent form, and we'll talk about consent forms in a moment. Let's look at what vulnerable populations are. Vulnerable populations are individuals or groups who, by reason of disability, illness, age, or other status, exhibit diminished personal autonomy. Vulnerable categories include, but are not limited to, children, prisoners, handicapped or mentally disabled persons, socially or economically disadvantaged persons, pregnant women, human fetuses. Those are some of the categories that the Department of Health and Human Services identifies as vulnerable populations, okay? So if your participants involve any of these kinds of folks, then you have parts of vulnerable populations involved in your study, okay? And it's absolutely required that you have a consent form, and that consent form is reflected of the requirements that we'll talk through in a moment. The second area is called sensitive topics. Any research protocol that involves solicitation of information from human subjects that could reasonably cause harm to participants if the data were not kept confidential is considered sensitive topic research. Causing embarrassment is the minimum threshold for determining whether research harm is foreseeable and thus sensitive. Sensitive topics include, but are not limited to, marriage and family, personal practices, financial status, political opinions, religious beliefs, criminal activity, sexual orientation, attitudes, preferences, practices, or issues involving incest, rape, date rape, sexual molestation, etc. Those are all considered sensitive topics. If you're going to get into any of those issues in terms of the questions that you'd be asking people, your research falls under the category of sensitive topics. And your proposal will, again, be reviewed by the review board, and we will give you, and you'll need to submit a consent form that you would be using with that group. We would then look at that content and make sure that it meets all the criteria that we know of in terms of meeting the Department of Health and Human Services. Privacy is defined as having control over the extent, timing, and circumstances of sharing oneself with others. Please be attentive to threats to participants' privacy. An acceptable practice is to distribute invitations to a broad population and ask for persons to self-identify as meeting more narrow criteria. An option for some sensitive interview research is to offer the participants the opportunity to review the publication draft for unintended markers of identity. And confidentiality is the same kind of situation. You will see sections in Miriam's book and in Cresswell's book and in Sensing's book, all on this issue of confidentiality. Chapters are labeled differently. Ethical issues. We have a section in our proposal called ethical issues. All these issues come under the category of ethical issues: confidentiality, privacy, sensitive topics, vulnerable populations. These are the kinds of issues that we would expect you to address in that ethical issues section of chapter 3 of your proposal. Let's just quickly look at a consent form. Let me see. Let's take this off the screen for a moment. Come on. Okay. Okay. We have a sample consent form. This would kind of be a model that you would use in designing a consent form. Again, when we designed this consent form, we had a lawyer working with us to make sure that we were a lawyer who had expertise in the formation of consent forms for schools. So we designed this consent form with those all those requirements involved. And so you would fill out, you would create this consent form that would be distributed to people that are going to participate in your research, okay? And in some of these, key questions, you're being asked to take part in a research study related to Baki Graduate University on the topic of, you'd put in your, whatever the topic happens to be. You must be at least 18 years of older, include any other requirements for participants in the study, okay? What we'll have later on, though, if you are under 18, then you need to have a parental consent form, or at least if there's not a parent involved, there's some legal guardian that can give consent for this underage person to be involved. What we'll ask you to do, if you agree to be in this study, we will conduct an interview with you. The interview will include questions and etc. And you just kind of give a broad definition of what those questions might entail. Again, you're not doing specifics. We had the question on focus groups a moment ago. Do we need to distribute all the specific questions? No, but we would talk in this section in a consent form. You would at least give your participants a general idea of the kinds of topics that they would be being asked to discuss, say within a focus group or an interview. Risk and benefits. There is the risk that you may find some of the questions to be sensitive in nature. Note for studies opposing no specific risk, use the IRB standard minimal risk statement, and we can talk about that. I do not anticipate any risk in your participating in this study other than those encountered in the day-to-day life. There are no benefits to you other than what you may learn from the study. Okay, now like Dr. Henry just mentioned, we had a student who did research there in Jamaica, and he actually, gave them some compensation, but the compensation was specifically for the traps and travel expenses. Technically, that would be noted in this form. Okay, compensation. You will earn no compensation participating in this study. Probably if for that model, and I don't remember what Noel put down, if he did at all, because he might have just did that at the end. But technically, that should have been spelled out in the consent form. The researcher will provide some travel-related expenses. Okay, that would have been an appropriate piece of his consent form. Your answers will be confidential. Goes into all that. Anyway, all these issues are here, and then the participant signs it. The idea is to use this form, use the form as your model, your example. For example, if here, this asks, the interview will include questions. If you're going to use this form for a focus group, you'd say the focus group, okay? So that, if this is a model, you just reword it a bit for your own purposes, okay? And then in this case, the person gives their signature, the date, your name, etc. We've had some situations where because of the high degree of danger in some countries, we had to find a way that people could give anonymous consent, just because there was always the danger that this form could fall in the wrong hands and create extreme danger to a person. And so we have, as a committee, we will work with you in trying to determine ways to meet these standards in the way that provides the least amount of risk to the people that are involved in your particular study. So you'd be asked to, submit a consent form. You would then also, and let me just bring on the actual application that you'd be filling out. It looks like this. You fill out this form, and just a lot of standard issues, the date, who's the principal researcher, any co-researchers, the project title, keywords for this that you see in this in study, the inclusive dates of the project, the final project supervisor, any funding agencies that are involved, any investigational agents that might be involved. You talk about the types of participants, indicate the project will involve only adults or category, and the categories of people, adults are considered those 18 or 18 older. Any groups, any other groups, children, mentally disabled, emotionally disturbed, etc. You would identify, the groups that you foresee participating in your project. And so we have all these different questions in terms of, participants, inducement, monetary issues we just talked about. The term informed consent, that's really what a consent form is in relationship to a research project. It's informed consent, which means you're informing the people involved in your particular project. You're informing of what will be involved in their participation, if there are any risks, what is being done to ensure their confidentiality, what is being done to ensure the least amount of risk to them as people, mentally, physically, emotionally, etc. All that is what's involved in the term informed consent. Okay. Here toward the fore end, you're asked to evaluate from your perspective what are the risks that are involved in people being a part of your particular project. Will research involve any possible invasion of privacy of the participants or their families? Yes, no, notes. Will research involve administration of any physical stimulus? Probably not in our situation. Those that are involved in medical research, they would need to talk more about any physical issues, drugs, etc., that would be administered. Anyway, all these are all standard categories that we've had to adopt into our application form because they are used in various kinds of institutional educational settings. But anyway, you would fill that out, you sign off on this, and then this form, along with a sample consent form, is submitted to our institutional review board for review to make sure that your proposed research meets the criteria as determined in terms of human research based on the standards of the Department of Health and Human Services here in the United States. This is kind of a very brief summary of what the Institutional Review Board is about, and maybe just some of the kinds of issues that you would be including in that section in your proposal called ethical issues. I think what I'll do, I'll go ahead and send these forms out to everyone. That way you'll have them before you. I have just a summary form of the policy manual. I won't send you the whole policy manual right now unless you request that of me. But anyway, you can maybe just kind of look over those forms and give you an idea of maybe anything you would need to include in that ethical issues section of the proposal in Chapter 3. Okay, that's a brief overview. Let me stop sharing and then we can answer questions. Go ahead.
You just released a bombardment of information on us right there.
Yeah.
Is that now, according to the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned special needs and that type of groups.
Right.
Is it true that we can avoid that form completely if we don't use those special groups?
Yeah, you can. I mean, since I'm looking at a proposal, I'm going to be able to, since I'm a co-professor in this class, and I come from the Institutional Review Board, I could pretty much tell you, yes, you definitely need to submit your proposal to our review board, or no, I think we're pretty safe in not doing that. And so I'd give you that feedback when we look at your final proposal for this class. Both Dr. Henry and I will both be looking at the final version of your proposal, and both of us will give our input. But yeah, I mean,
Because
if you had no vulnerable populations, we felt like there was no sensitive topics. Of course, in their definition, sensitive topics is a pretty broad range. It includes religious beliefs, political beliefs. It's a pretty broad range. That's why probably 80% of our research, of our dissertations have to get some kind of review from the review board. But go ahead.
yeah, as you were going through that list, I was pretty much saying check, 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 check. And I kind of came to the conclusion that I would be using surveys for practitioners and experts, empirical study documents, and literature review, and kind of avoid those dominant populations if I possibly can.
Yeah, and you certainly can do that. If you're going to just really focus on those expert, when you're working in arts and technology, I mean, if you're not going to interview any youth, you're not going to have any youth involved in your research, then, you can cross off that particular category. If any youth were going to be involved in answering anything on, how arts and technology have been used in their life, then you would have to have, that consent form. Whether you are subject to the IRB scrutiny or not, I would almost require a consent form for anybody who's going to participate in your work, whether they fit the vulnerable population category or they fit the sensitive topic. That's just a good standard practice to have people at least sign off. Yes, I've agreed to participate in this study, facilitated by Matt Davis on this particular topic. That protects you, and it protects us as a school in case anybody decided to sue or do something weird.
Right, I was looking at that, and of course we include youth. My research would be centered around youth. However, if I look at the facilitators instead of the children and get the questions answered through them, then I won't have to include the youth.
And then again, you are avoiding that vulnerable population, right? Like I say, I'm hesitant to give you a definitive answer right now until I've really looked at your final proposal to make sure that I think it's fitting all the categories that we as the IRB have to look at when we're examining any proposal. But yeah, based on your verbalization right now, it doesn't sound like you would have, vulnerable populations or sensitive topics that you would be addressing in your research.
I see the gears, the gears flowing in Dr. Henry's mind right now. She doesn't want to say yes or no, and she's trying to figure out a way that I cannot avoid this. I can tell, but I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, I mean, both Dr. Henry and I both feel it's always a good idea, if not required, that you at least submit something so that we as part of the IRB can at least review that. We have what we, in the handbook, there's different levels of review. The first level of review is just the coordinator looking at the proposal and making a determination. Does it need to go to the next step, to a full review? And I think we've got 4 or 5 different stages of review levels that are required, that we follow, depending on what level of risk we believe is involved in a particular research approach. But it starts with me as a coordinator. I can give you feedback at the level 1.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay. It is true. I kind of gave you a lot of content very quickly just because of time, but I just wanted you at least to be aware of the IRB and the processes that we must be involved in to meet the standards that are imposed upon us as an educational institution from the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, any other questions? I guess we're at half past the hour now. We've pretty much filled up our hour and a half. Any other quick questions that we can answer? Okay, this week you are finishing out the research methodology chapter. You'll get feedback on that chapter. Then by the end of June, by June 30th, you will need to submit, a whole proposal and for a grade. And even as I put the memo out to all of you, kind of the dates and some of the issues that are involved as you move through the whole dissertation process, getting a supervisor, etc., submitting your proposal to the academic cabinet. We have a subcommittee of the academic cabinet called the dissertation advisory team. We pretty much look at that proposal and give you feedback. We can sometimes give you, an approval. We may give you a conditional approval saying, we conditionally approve this proposal if you make these revisions. We've got, 4 or 5 of us that are on that committee. We each have different levels of expertise in the whole research process and writing, and different ones will give their feedback. So, but anyway, June 30th is the date that your proposal is due for the class to upload it to the Populi. And then July 15th is the deadline to submit a proposal to the Academic Cabinet Committee if you plan to graduate in June of 2021. So, when you take this class at this particular time in year, you've got a fairly short window of time to get that proposal back from us, graded, and then getting it to your supervisor, and then getting a completed document put together by July 15th. But it can be done. Students do it all the time when they take this particular course at this, in the spring term. Okay. Well, I think with that, we do need to close. We're not involved in discussions this week. Just really focus your efforts in getting that chapter 3 completed, because that, we want to make sure that that chapter is in really good order, because it's again defining the whole focus of your research. And then that's the one chapter that we in the IRB committee will look at we'll scrutinize that committee very closely. All right, with that, this session has been tape recorded, and I will upload the recording probably either today or tomorrow. And you can look at that again and go back over. The focus group PowerPoint will be uploaded. Dr. Henry will upload that. I will also, I think, I'll check to see if all those IRB forms are in the files area of the class. I think they are, but I'll just make sure that all that content is uploaded in our Populi course. All right, all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good week. Blessings on you.
For sure.
Enjoy your work.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll
Bye.
try.